Hey everyone, and welcome to the Eminence Legacy podcast. My name is Alfonso Cadena, and I'm joined here by my co-host.
Jose Luis Cadena, and thank you for joining us.
All right, if you haven't subscribed already, be sure to do that and go ahead and leave us a comment. Let us know what you think in the review. So we're going to go ahead and get started today, and we're going to be talking about something that is, I feel like I say this every week, but that's what we try to keep this podcast about, right? Something about being relevant, something that we can actually use practically every single day. So what we're going to be talking about today is memory. So going into this, what did you find out, Jose Luis?
Well, memories is important to stay on it. It's like a fitness for the mind, basically. And if we don't work on it, eventually, like everything else, it starts decaying. And it has a lot of times it has nothing to do with your inability to remember things. A lot of times, it's more the inability for us to practice um, um, remembering things.
Right. So, and one of the things that we're particularly going to be looking at is being able to transfer information from the short-term memory over to the long-term memory. So, when you're talking about short-term memory, it's something that isn't going to last very long, and and that's a lot of the stuff that we do. So let's say, for example, part of what we're talking about is, let's say, working memory. If working memory is something that, let's say, you're going ready to go to the gym or you're getting ready to go for a run. So you need to remember where you left your shoes, where you left your keys, where you're the route that you're going to take. All those little things are very temporary, and it's only going to be there in your mind for a short period of time, because once you get over that process, guess what? You're not going to need that information anymore. So why are you going to store it, right? It's like, for example, like if you look at your iPhone uh, and you start getting that warning that you're already getting filled to capacity, then you're going to have to start dumping out all the pictures that you took 20 times of the food that you were trying to get just right for your Instagram account. It's the same thing with your mind. You can't just be storing huge volumes of information, right? And because in reality, it is a lot, that our minds are processing every single day and every single moment. So a lot of the information that we are going to need in the immediate moment is going to be forgotten within a few minutes or even a few seconds, and it's going to be different from everyone. As a matter of fact, before looking into this, I was looking into the concept of how to improve your working memory. Now, that's not something that we're going to focus here on. We're going to focus more about how to transfer your working memory into the long term memory. But particularly when it comes to working memory, everybody is going to be in a different level. So I was listening to, I believe it's Andrew Huberman. Have you ever heard him?
No, can't say I have.
No, I'll have to send you the link, man, because it was actually really interesting, because he was making the connection about the correlation between dopamine and the ability to be able to improve your working memory. And within the same program, he was also talking uh, about how we can gauge more or less how good our working memory is. And the way he did that is that he recited, let's say, like 5 words, right? And after a few seconds, right, you hear the combination of 5 words, and then he'll ask you, it's like, okay, can you recite the words back to me that I mentioned to you? And after 3 different strands of words of groups of 5 each, some people might remember 2 lines. Some people may remember 3 lines. Some people might just remember 1 line. It could be the most recent one or the very previous one. But very little people are actually able to remember all of them. Nonetheless, it gives you a pretty good idea of how good your working memory is. So I would definitely go check that out, and we could probably leave a reference to it in the show notes. Because I would say that's a good prior step to what it is that we're talking about here. But when it comes to transferring the temporary memory, short-term memory to a long-term, it's really what we're going to be looking at.
Yeah, that's important. I would say for a lot of reasons. I mean, before cell phones, we would have to remember our phone number or people's phone number because we didn't have it stored. And now, if you lose your phone, you lose all your contacts. So that's
Yeah,
an
you
example of transferring your short term to a long term. I still remember my old phone number from my parents' house, you know, and that's been a long time.
Yeah, that's a good point, and when you go, a lot of people don't think about this either, but one of the reasons that we have, let's say you go to like an old cathedral, um, you see like a lot of the art, right? You see like the tainted windows, the stained glass windows, sorry. You see the imagery through statues and stuff like that. One of the reasons for it is because people there was a lot of illiteracy during the day, and pictures were a perfect way for people to remember long stories. So it's like, oh yeah, that statue represents this, so you can contain a huge amount of information that is basically a story, and it's all summarized like in one image. So and because back in the day, it's like, when you didn't have as much access to books and stuff like that, or like you said, like the smartphones, you had to use other tools to try to remind yourself about that. I mentioned here in this podcast before that every year we watch the traditional uh films, like for example It's a Wonderful Life, and one of the characters, he has a string um around his fingers tied up, and the purpose of the string is to remind him that he needs to remember something because he knew he was very forgetful. So people have been trying to figure this out for a long time. And another interesting point about it too is that you go to school for so many years, and what is the basis whether they determine that you're qualified to pass to the next grade or to pass the course? They base it on the exam. But how many courses do you recall, like that about memory, or about study tools? I don't recall like actually being exposed to tools that we could use to be able to improve that. But yet it was expected of us.
In my time, we didn't either. And I wanna also collaborate to what you said. We do think in pictures. Like when we think about things, we think in pictures. When we talk about our house, we picture our house in our mind. Talk about our car, we think about the car. Even when we're talking to other people, we those kind of those glimpses of our the part of our lives come into mind. So I think that we've been, I guess, we naturally think in pictures.
Absolutely. Yeah, pictures, stories, like it's just there's a reason why these stuff stands the test of time, and generations can share the same pictures, the same stories over and over. What comes to mind is about like I think I read recently that you can now you remember that, like that picture, I believe it was like maybe like a union workers that were having their lunch on top of a piece of steel, like hovering over like the city of New York City. I think you
Yeah.
can replicate that picture now. I think I saw that recently. I'm
Hmm.
not sure. Don't quote me on that. But point is, like to prove your point, that like that picture is so iconic that everybody has seen it, and at some point and remembers it.
Yeah.
So with that said, let's go ahead and talk about some of the tools, right, that we could use to be able to. And again, we're talking not so much about improving your working memory, which again we're going to leave more information about that in the show notes, but how to transfer short-term short-term memory information over to your long-term. And you might think it's like, oh well, I'm not in school anymore, so why do I need this? Why do I need this at all? It's like, well, in reality, it's like, I mean, we're always in a learning process, right? If you're going to start a new job, guess what? You're going to have to learn the lingo. You're going to have to learn the system that they use, and so you're going to be in a position in your life where you're going to have to pick up on new routines and new information that you're going to have to memorize in order for you to be successful in that field. So,
Yeah.
with that said, let's go ahead and start with this one. Focusing your attention, right? So, I found that I watch a lot of how-to videos, right? And I think funny enough that like like these days you can make like the video smaller on the app that you're using. So if you're trying to do a how-to video, like watch a how-to video and at the same time do other stuff on your phone, it's just not going to work. But yet I catch myself doing that very often. So what ends up happening, I have to either rewind it or rewatch the video because I learned nothing at all because my attentions were not fully focused on that.
And that's the same thing that happens when you get like on your laptop or your computer and trying to work on something. for some reason you start looking something up, and then you kind of forget that you had a test in mind. It's just that we sometimes get so easily distracted. Me myself, when I read, it has to be quiet, because if there's a lot of noise, I'm rereading the same sentence like 5 times. I'm not the type to be able to read to music or sounds. I need to just read on my own. Like, it needs to be pretty quiet for me to capture everything. Now I know that doesn't work for everybody. Some people actually listen to music while they read, but that doesn't jive with me.
Right. So, but it comes back to that myth, and we have another episode on this. I'm pretty sure we do. Uh, but about the myth of multitasking, right? And it kind of feeds into our habits too. That we believe that we can do more than one thing at once, and in reality, you're not going 100% at that one item. Instead, you're focusing on a battle on different fronts, and in the end, that's going to like stress you out. It's going to make you less effective. And in this case, in the context of like being able to learn something, uh, to transferring over to the long term memory, it's going to work against you if you cannot just put your full attention into it.
Most definitely, I do think that if we want to succeed in something, we need to focus 100% in it, and not give it like 50 or 40%. We do need to, our attention needs to be there. Um, in relationships, I mean, if you're too busy looking at the phone every time they're talking to you, I don't think it's going to turn out really good, because we're focusing on two things at once, and sometimes that other person is really needing your attention. And we fell on that very easily, and a lot of misunderstandings can come from that. And we could avoid a lot of, I guess, stressors, anxieties, if we were just to kind of focus on one thing.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely a big one. But yeah, so that's the first tool. That definitely pay attention whenever whatever it is that you're going to set your mind on to learning or to be able to memorize or trying to, you know, uh, to use in the future. Go ahead and do that. Put your full attention into it. Which brings us to the next point, which is avoiding cramming, right? And what I mean by that is that like this happens a lot. Like I mean, like in the fitness space, when you overtrain, and because of overtraining, you run the risk of injury, exhaustion. You end up performing like more poorly because, like again, you haven't given your body enough time to recover. Uh, and it's the same thing when we try to, when we want to wait. Okay, I'm gonna wait for 9 a.m. on Saturday, and I'm gonna cram in as much of information that I can on that one day, and um,
Yeah.
and then I'll learn everything after that. Most of the time, that's just not going to work. You're going to get halfway through, not maybe not even that far, but you're only going to get so far. You're going to be exhausted, and you're not going to be in the mood for it because all of a sudden now it's like it could have just you at one point you could have seen it as like, oh, it's just going to be 30 minutes or an hour that day. Now you turn it into 6, and as chances are you're not even going to get to it because you're going to see that now you have to invest more time, uh, and it's just going to be discouraging.
There's this method, I believe it's called a chunking method, that you do like portions at a time. That way you won't fatigue or stress out. This could be used for anything. I mean, you wake up on a Saturday and you have a task, you should tell yourself, okay, I'm gonna work on this task from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. to 10 a.m. and then I'm gonna move on to something else. But sometimes we kind of try to do everything at once, and it kind of like sets us back instead of sending us forward. And going back to the memory, you're going to forget things because you're rushing through it because you want to get it done and in that particular moment, when you could probably stretch it out over time to be able to complete the same task a little bit more detail, a little bit more thorough, versus you trying to just rush the process.
Yeah, that's definitely related to this. So, what was the name of that again?
Chunking method.
Chunking
Yeah.
method, right? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I actually had that on my notes. I forgot to mention it, but yeah, I'm glad. I'm really glad you brought it up because that's definitely related to this. So the next step that you could also do, or method, is going to be like structure and organizing. So a lot of times we get, they throw a bunch of information at us, and it doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense because like it's not a lot of times coherent. And what I mean by that is that like, um, like it's all related, but it's not connected per se, right? So at one point you're talking about, let's say you're taking like a government course, right? At one moment you're talking about like something within the judicial system, but then they hop over something about legislation, and you're like, wait a minute, how are the two related? Well, they're related. They're just two different systems. So instead of having to uh, memorize them each individually, try to find how each one is related with its own group. Um, and separate them. Try to separate them in a way that you can understand what each group is referring to. That way, you can actually get a full understanding of it, rather than just trying to understand full abstract concepts. Try to organize it in such a way where it's like, okay, this is referring to subject A, that these items are referring to subject B, and then once you memorize each one of those categories, then you can try to mesh them together and see how they're related.
And I think that I'm gonna math. When you start with multiplication, addition, subtraction, and as you move forward to the other levels, which is algebra, pre-algebra, or whatever, it once you know the basics, everything correlates with everything you start adding on top. So when you're talking about relating the structures, okay, so how do we get here? Okay, we started basic. What was the basic? The foundation, and then we built up. So I think that learning the structure, like you were saying, and being able to organize and correlate one with the other. And I want to add to that. I think also what helps is to keep everything uncluttered. And I'm gonna show you how it relates to it, because when you keep things tidy and in place and a little bit more organized, you're able to remember things easier. For example, how many times do we lose our keys? And why do we lose our keys? Because we toss them wherever. When we get home, we just toss them on the table. We toss them maybe on the counter. We toss them next to your bedstand. So they're always moving. There's not a natural place for it. So that kind of messes with your brain. Okay, what was the last time I did with this particular item? So I think like being a little bit more organized and having less clutter, it would help you with your memory process and improving it to know where things are.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it, and I think it's because it's what's going to keep you focused and from getting distracted, right? And I like that you brought up another good point too, because another thing that it's uh, so if we're not able to articulate what it is that we're the concept that we're trying to express, it's because you do not fully understand it, right? So uh, let's say for example, like you hear this like when you study like for whether it's for public speaking, right? It's like if you can't summarize what your topic was in a single sentence, uh, then you didn't prepare a topic or you weren't organized, and it's kind of the same thing like with this, right? So like, I mean, you're trying to organize the information to make it coherent so that when you deliver it, you'll be able to make sense it is that you're actually saying, and a lot of times when people get frustrated a bit about not being able to explain something is because they don't actually grasp the information well enough themselves.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I had a and moving on to the next point, when it comes to like elaborate and rehearse, I took a course in cognition once, and the professor focused a lot like on memory, and one of the things that he would talk about was about like an in-depth um, process, right? When like, so what I mean by that is that, so you a lot of times we, again, there's a term thrown at us that we never heard about before. Uh, like and we're trying to understand what it and usually our first instinct is just to memorize the book definition of it, right? But a lot of times it's like, I mean, when you're just learning the definition of it, it doesn't really create meaning. But if you're able to, again, going back to like a picture, if you're able to like experience what it is that the concept is explaining, and that in that case, you're going to create a more memorable connection with the term. Um, so let's say, for example, uh, like what comes to mind right now is like, let's say when we go to the gym, right? It's like, okay, what is one way that we could, so that we'll see a video. It's like, okay, this is how you do a squat, right? And and you're like, okay, well that looks easy enough. But then you try it, and then you realize that your form isn't coming out the way that you saw the video as, right? So when you break it down into, it's like, okay, what is it that I can conceptualize from this? Like it's like, okay, if I pretend that my butt is touching the wall, and then going forward, then I'll be able to create the movement, right? So then you
Yep.
start changing the focus into, rather than just definitions or pure description, then actually putting like an image in your mind of what it is that you're trying to do. You're going to realize that the form is going to come out much better. And it's kind of the same thing with a lot of these concepts, right? So we're so accustomed to just learning the definition, but if you apply it to like a real world setting, it's like you were saying, for example, like in the math class, it's like, oh, if you have what is 3 plus 3? It's like, okay, it's 6, right? It's like, but for the student that is having trouble learning that, it's like, okay, you have 3 apples, and your mom gives you 3 more apples, or $2, your mom gives you $2 more. How much do you have now? So no longer are you just talking about abstract numbers. Now you're actually talking about something that the child can relate to,
Yep.
right? The other tool that I thought was really funny is give me just
I
1 second.
I
Go ahead.
couldn't even pronounce that word, so you're gonna have to say.
Yeah, I have to read it because it's not like an I read the lexicon, right? So
Yeah.
mnemonic devices, and it's funny because talking about like picturing like something in your mind to remember it. I was, as soon as I saw this word, I'm like, okay, I know exactly what this is, because there's like in the show The Office, which I'm a huge fan of. I can't tell you how many times I've seen that show. uh, Michael Scott would take a lot of pride of memorizing everybody's name uh, by using mnemonic devices. So, like in one scene, I have the quote put up here. He says, "I have an amazing mnemonic device by which I have now memorized all of your names: Shirty, Mo, Lazy Eye, Mexico, Baldy, black woman." So like it's just like there were just offensive descriptions of everybody in the room, that were conjured up in his mind, and that was the way that he was remembering their names. And basically, the whole episode, he was making people in the office upset. But the point of it was, that like it took it to an extreme, that an exaggeration that we're not going to be using. But yeah, like finding rhymes, or finding something
Chants
funny,
or
or
rhymes.
right, or something funny that relates to it. It's like, oh well, that's a funny word. It reminds me of this other word. So things like that makes it memorable for and easier on the memory to grill in there.
There's the a while back a girl that remembered like a whole bunch of stuff, and they go compete for this stuff, and they asked her, how do you remember like all this? She says that she relates it to the route going back to her house, so that's how she was able to memorize everything. And I don't remember really the competition, what it consisted of, but it was a memory competition, who could remember the most. And everything she related to the streets around her neighborhood, how to get home. So those are like type of I guess practices that you could use. For everybody has their different, but I believe that's similar to what we're talking about.
Yeah, that reminds me of the next one, actually. Like relating new information to things you already know. Isn't like Slumdog Millionaire? It's been a long time since I've seen that movie, but isn't that kind of related to the same thing though? Where it was like a
Oh
trivia
yeah.
show. It was a
Mm-hmm.
trivia show, and all he would do. It reminded me a lot of what you're saying right now. That there was something that he knew about his past, or that he experienced, that he was able to apply it, and be able to answer the correct answer to each trivia question that was thrown at him. Uh, but yeah, like and it's funny because in that show I was mentioning to you earlier about the working memory. the example, I felt that I had an advantage in the little like test that he gave on there, because he said, it's like, see if you can remember this sentence, and it's like, and it was something around the lines that's like, oh, in Texas this, or in Texas that. Is like, oh, okay, it's easy for me to remember because I'm a Texas. I've been living in Texas my whole life, so. Um, so the questions were easy to remember just because I was able to relate them to my personal life. But yeah,
Mm.
that's a we a lot of times we don't try to take too much time to be able to build that bridge of being able to relate that question and see how it relates to our personal lives and what we already know. And finally, we're gonna get to the last one, which is I'm gonna I've done this one myself when it comes to reading things out loud. I mean, that partly helps, but I think another thing that really helps me a lot too, and I thank my wife for being patient with me on that, is that I just recite things back to other people, and let them know what I've been learning, or the information that I've been acquiring about a certain subject, and I'll just bore her with the details, but. But I found that, like, when I say it out loud and be able to express this in my own words, I'll end up remembering it for a longer period of time.
You know, aside from reading things out loud, I would say also, I write things down, and while I'm writing them, I'm reading them. So it kind of helps me. Like, so most of my stuff is written because I kind of like visualize it and then say it. So I kind of help myself remember things by doing that. Um, and like you mentioned, repeating things to other people. I think the best way to remember stuff is by sharing it with somebody else, especially like a book. Like if you start sharing a book with somebody else, that's the way you kind of remember what you've been reading, what you've been learning, and you learn it twice because now you're having to explain to the other person what it means, or what they meant by that, or why you're looking into it. So it kind of builds that little self confidence that you need, and your memory keeps working on it. One thing, most of this stuff, um, we capture it better when we're asleep. Once we're asleep, your mind starts transferring that information, and allows you to captivate more, and even sometimes find solutions for your problems. The mind is endless. There's so many things that it could do, and we're not even scratching the surface on the things we could do with our mind.
Yeah, it's funny when you mentioned about the writing things down. Like, I do that myself. Like, I'll write something down to remember, and then I have to remind myself. It's like, okay, what was the point of writing it down if I remembered anyway? But then I remind myself, well, it's like, maybe you remembered because you wrote it down. So even if you
Yeah.
won't look, even though you didn't look at it ever again, you realize that it still did its purpose. It got engraved in the memory. So yeah, definitely. Yeah, thanks for sharing. So that ends this week's episode. If you guys enjoyed the podcast, don't forget to leave us a review. You can find me on Instagram and Cadena Alfonso. And don't forget to visit our website at eminencelegacy.com, where you could find coaching services, including an ongoing blog. Jose Luis, do you want to make any plugins?
Yeah, like we encourage you guys to be part of our Patreon group, and also make sure to leave your comments. And more than anything, again, we ourselves are work in progress. We're not saying we got everything figured out, but this is what we're trying to I guess accomplish, repeating what we're learning in order for us to be able to stick with it. And thank you for joining us, and we hope that everybody is working to rise to their eminence.
All right. Have a good week.